Let's unpack that a little bit because you've said a
Yeah,
mouthful there in terms, particularly with the misconceptions and the
yeah,
perceptions of black femininity from even from adults. But let's drill down. I want to talk about it from
yeah,
the vantage point of other African Americans because as
yeah,
I read over your book and I read some of the book, I'll be honest. Most people won't do this. I'm going to be honest. My first
yeah.
gut reaction was erasure. And my first gut reaction was, well, what about the black boys? And I feel like I had to catch myself, right? Just full disclosure, I had
Yeah,
to
no,
catch
I
myself
appreciate that.
because I have a young black daughter, right? And if something happens to my son, God forbid, and then something happens to my daughter, I would clearly see the need to bring light to my daughter's circumstances. How do you address that erasure that comes from the black community, as well as that misconception of what black femininity is and what it should be, particularly from the black perspective?
I so appreciate you for being honest with that.
It's I thought
And I
about
think,
I thought about not
you
mentioning it,
know,
but keep it 100.
no, say it, say it. And this is really interesting because much of the pushback that I have received on this has not come from, black women. It hasn't
Hmm.
come from women of other racial groups, and it hasn't come from white men, right?
Mm,
A lot of the pushback has been the ways in which we have been in this false, oppression Olympics with each other, the black men and black women, about how our pain manifests
yeah.
and who gets priority in this racial justice movement.
Mm,
And I actually wrote this because I hope that we're moving in a direction, and I think in many communities we are, toward bridge building so that we are no longer trying to compete against each other in
right.
our degrees of oppression, but rather working together to build community. Because I said for years that black girls and black boys are sharing surveillance. They're sharing this
Mm,
structure of oppression. They go to the same schools, we share homes, we share relationships,
right.
and in many ways, we are impacted by these structures, and yet our prioritization of black male pain has facilitated the erasure of black female pain in many ways. So I think, number one, it's important to recognize that that is, I think a conditioned response to
Mm,
feeling that there's only room for one level and discussion of pain in our communities. And what we've done is we try to present the pain as uniform, right? We're all impacted by this, so let's deal with those who are greatest in numbers first, and then we'll get to you. And
mm,
what that has meant is let's prioritize the men and boys whose numbers are indisputably greater than other numbers, and that absolutely deserves the investment of the foundations and our community in a way that is vigorous and that can attack the structures of oppression that are impacting black boys and young men. But I have always maintained this argument that we have to invest in our community, but not to the exclusion of black girls and young women, because the pain that black boys are feeling is related to the pain that black girls are feeling. The
mm.
pain that black girls are feeling is related to the pain that boys are feeling in our communities. And if we don't engage that consciousness and begin to attack the stereotypes that keep the division intact,
Yeah.
then we're going to continue to experience these levels of oppression together. The piece around black feminine identity that is important for us to understand are the historical constructs that have made black femininity, sort of difficult to consume in the public domain. It's either presented as hypersexual or conniving, loud and sassy, right?
Hmm.
Ratchet is the most recent way in
Yeah.
which people have come to understand what's happening and in the expressions of black girls. And that, the responses that people, sort of present when they are confronted with black femininity, I argue, is leading to a push out from school that renders girls vulnerable to participation in underground economies, and that renders them vulnerable to contact with the criminal and juvenile legal system. And it also renders them vulnerable to differential treatment and enforcement of school-based policies
Mm,
that can facilitate their push out. And so that, to me, is rooted in the legacy of slavery and segregated opportunity that continues to create the wedge between the men and women and boys and girls who are experiencing similar structures of oppression, or in some cases, the exact same structure of oppression.
Yeah.
And that doesn't get us to a place where we can interrogate the intersections between patriarchy, sexism, racism, socioeconomic oppression
Oh yeah.
that impacts all of us,
Oh yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that facilitates, punishment as a response, punishment and discipline and in response.